My name's Naomi. I work for Amnesty International as a campaign manager, and when kind of practicing this talk early on, I realised how quick 7 minutes goes, so I'm going to talk quite quickly and skip the first slide probably. Some of the, what I'm firstly going to make a couple of kind of general points and then look at a couple of case studies. So firstly, the way that we see our kind of digital activism at Amnesty is to situate it within wider activism. It is just one tool amongst a lot of others. So online we've got our website, our e-action or Slacktivism as been termed, our Facebook and Twitter, amongst a lot of the social networking sites such as other things such as MySpace or Bebo. We do prioritise Facebook and Twitter as our main social networking sites. But offline, we have got thousands of activists up and down the countries who are meeting monthly in local groups, in our student groups, in universities across the country, in youth groups. And we've got networks and affiliates in trade unions, our Women's Network and LGBT, for example. And so there is a crossover between our online activists as well as the kind of offline activism that we do. So everything from having a stall in your local community through to the kind of investor activism we do, where we're talking to investors if our target is a company. And all of these things, there is a big overlap between the people who are meeting every month and the online work that we do. They're using online spaces to coordinate the kind of work that they do. And so although I can understand that there is some scepticism about the signing of a petition or the joining of a Facebook group, actually this all does add to the noise of a multitude of other activism strategies that are going on at the same time. To bear in mind, however, that there is also an opportunity cost. If we're putting a huge amount into digital activism, we have to know that it is working and that it's worthwhile, because that energy and that time could be better spent elsewhere. And we also have to think about a risk assessment on the work that we do. So if we are creating a huge amount of noise around an individual case, for example, sometimes that can have a negative effect and entrench the situation for that individual. So these are some of the kind of things that we think about when we're strategizing around this. So that's the kind of first point, which is that digital activism shouldn't supplant other forms of activism. And the second one is about seeing activism as being more than just Facebook and Twitter. Again, people can become very dismissive of liking something on Facebook or joining a group, but in fact there's a huge amount of digital tools out there as well as those ones that can be used. And one of the ones I'm just showcasing here is Eyes on Nigeria, which has just been launched this weekend by our US section, who's working together with the American Academy for the Advancement of Science. And what they've done is use digital satellite imagery to map out human rights abuses happening in the Niger Delta. So on here it's got cases of forced evictions, issues around policing injustice, conflict, impacts of the oil industry, and then that's tagged to data around each of those issues, testimony from individuals, case studies and images. And this is information that can actually be uploaded by people on the ground as well as analysed outside of the country too. And this information is very important for activists on the ground. It's not just about kind of sending an email to a target. It's also about having information about the situation on the ground that is needed to end impunity. It's needed as evidence within trials or again, a huge amount of different reasons why it can be used. And likewise to look out for as well Map Kibera, which is a activity of citizen mapping and citizen media. So Kibera is one of the biggest slums in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look on Google Maps, it's completely blank space, whereas in fact 1 million people live there. And what Map Kibera does is to map out where the infrastructure is, where toilet and sanitation is, where medical stations are, as a way, because that information is a way for them then to use it to lobby local authorities for better provision of services. And again, this is the kind of thing that we're even seeing in the UK with the cuts at the moment, that people are mapping out where those cuts are happening in their local communities so that they can lobby more widely on it. And likewise, Ushahidi as well, which is another kind of initiative that came out of Nairobi in Kenya. It was set up after the political violence after the elections in 2008. And this was a way of, again, citizens uploading the information of what was going on the ground and it being mapped on the website. And from that one incident, it's now being used across the world in lots of different projects, mostly in disasters and emergency situations, where people are able to upload this information. And it's become a vital source of information for journalists, for reporters, but also for relief workers as well. And it's open source too. So again, I don't just want to kind of focus on something like kind of Twitter or Facebook, although they are tools that are being used, but also to kind of see digital activism far more widely. And also this is important for an organisation like Amnesty, which is very northern heavy as an organisation in the West and the global North, and a way for us to actually grow in the South, to connect to activists in the global South. And digital is one of those ways. It's not going to be perfect. There are barriers to people accessing digital media, not only in terms of just wealth and the physical implements that you need, but also because of discrimination on basis of gender, ethnicity or whatever. So there are two kind of like main points just to start off with, and just to look at a couple of case studies that we've been involved in as well, including the campaign we had against Shell for its impacts in the Niger Delta. And this combined both our online and offline activism. So you've got, our youth dressing up as oil wells. We've got people outside of Shell petrol stations. We've got people who were taking part in the Hell Station action as well, where they were covering up the S on Shell stations and posting a picture of that. And then we collated all of this together into a Google map to demonstrate the collection of activity that was happening across the country by our activists and individual activists as well. I know that although this was an initiative that started off in the UK, it got taken up by a lot of our European colleagues in the US. People obviously went on holiday and started doing this outside Shell stations as well, so it ended up in lots of random places as well. And it wasn't only to kind of demonstrate the amount of activism going on and showing it back to the activists, but also so that we could collect the actions themselves to hand over to Shell at their AGM last year. We can also use the kind of PR channels of corporates against themselves. So Shell is obviously concerned about its brand and its online presence, and so they did respond to online activism. Over about a year and a half now, what we did was get activists to tweet Shell asking for a web chat about their impacts in the Niger Delta. Shell have got their own web chat platform, Shell Dialogues, which is obviously where they like to go and talk about how great they are as a company. And so we asked that we could actually have a web chat about Nigeria there. Lots of activists tweeted them. They finally got back agreeing to the web chat. So not only did we realise that this was going to be a very controlled environment through their own website, we had a parallel web chat hosted on the Amnesty site, which was far more open for people to constantly respond to the answers that Shell were given, and also to really pick apart some of the data and the details they were giving us. We were also able to invite experts onto our more open parallel web chat, but we also had activists in the Niger Delta who were able to engage with this too. And we did try this out. I, even myself at the beginning, was a little bit sceptical about the use of Twitter and online media for this, but it was very effective. And the Nigerian activists who were, as if not more sceptical than myself, were also very pleased by how it went. Just quite timely as well, I thought it would be good just a few reflections on the use of digital activism, social media in the Middle East and North Africa at the moment. And I would say, as well as us all knowing that it has been used as an organising and mobilising tool by specific groups within specific countries, I think where it has really shown itself to be of benefit is as a news source. there is an understood risk as well with that about the information that is coming from people on the ground. I think it's kind of sophisticated users of Twitter know what should be a reliable source or not. And interestingly, it's actually been a lot of journalists, kind of mainstream media reporters on Twitter that people have relied on for their information. But we have got so much information and so much quicker than we would have without the use of Twitter. And also I think it's important to think about how the dynamic of having social media and the media has had an impact on these uprisings themselves. Somewhere like Egypt, which had a media hub there already, lots of reporters already on the ground. The impact of the media spotlight on Egypt is certainly different from somewhere like Bahrain, where there hasn't been that kind of access for the media. And so there is a role, even if people are not actually sending an email to whatever authority you would during a revolution in order to protect human rights, for example, there is a role that we can play as spectators on this, as witnesses to what is happening, and how that can change the dynamic within the countries themselves as well. So just some kind of final thoughts. As I said, we can't always be activists. We can't always take part in the social movements that are happening overseas. They are very much owned by the activists on the ground, but we can be the eyes to a lot of these movements, and we have a role to play in that, to sometimes just to add to the noise. Also, people aren't stupid, and so when online action very obviously is not having an impact, I think people are reflecting on that as well. So it isn't just about kind of liking something on Facebook and thinking that you've done your bit for the world. I think people are being confronted, if they are avid social media users, by the critiques of social media as well. And so I think people are reflective of that, and certainly campaigning organisations do respond to that too. So I would kind of encourage scepticism rather than cynicism on this, and also an acknowledgement of how networks do change over time. But there are a lot of ways that social media and digital activism can be particularly helpful for people in marginalised groups, in marginalised countries. And so I think we do have a role to play, certainly within this country and throughout the West, to find how we can give the tools to these activists so that we can connect to them better digitally. So I didn't even go into free speech and a restriction on online freedom of expression, but that would just have led to another plug for the libel reform campaign, which hopefully you all know about. Hopefully that will come up during the discussion as well. So thank you very much, and that's how you can get into contact with me.
There's a quote that I was just unable to find. I think it might be about financiers or lobbyists or something, that's about people will always find it more difficult to understand when their own pay packet is based upon them not understanding it. And the thing that I think we should all be aware of here is this is the e-campaigning forum. So the number of people in here who innately are likely to believe that actually the internet and activism is all a load of bollocks is, oh, it's probably being broadcast, isn't it? I've broken the watershed there. That this room is unlikely to contain a lot of very aggressive skepticism unless someone found an awful lot of money to give Malcolm Gladwell or Yevgeny Morozov. But I'm a practitioner. I obviously am one of these people paid to believe that it's a good idea, and so in order to just try and throw something a little bit different in here, rather than just going yay internet skepticism, I thought I'd do some background reading to find out what the state of the art was in relation to the evidence base that exists out there now, because there was a wonderful phrase used a few months ago to describe the state of the current debate about specifically about the effect of social media and the internet on political revolutions, which was a war of dueling anecdotes. And it was basically, you know, Malcolm Gladwell would have a really good anecdote, pow, and then some Clay Shirky would have another really good anecdote, pow, but they were all anecdotes, and whilst many of them are very compelling, it's not quite as good as, well, it's not the gold standard that you would expect, you know, Oxford University to go for. So I went hunting around, and I found a couple of relatively recent papers that I just wanted to talk to you about, and that's my contribution to today, is sort of what does it seem that we do really know and what don't we know. So there has been one recent paper from the United States headed up by a guy called Joseph Kahn that had got some coverage recently. It has an extremely long name, so I'm just going to call it the Kahn paper. But it got coverage that basically said, young people, internet, activism, yay, sort of as a general kind of gesture. But actually it turns out to be a very, very detailed paper with quite good evidence base. It's got a pair of different surveys. They're quite large. The fact there's a pair of them means they can compare everything against each other to see if the two surveys line up. They have statistically significant outcomes. They're good enough at social science to be able to do the statistics required. They use phrase like lag-dependent variable regression analysis and other things that just makes me cleverer saying it. And here's what I could try and pick out. So they took a look specifically at 3 kinds of use of social media. The first was the kind of people who actively do political stuff on the internet. They write political blog posts, or they put political things on Facebook. They would, I guess, sign petitions and that sort of thing. A second group who are what you might call sort of creative or participatory online people. They're the sort of people who write their own blog, or they maybe organise something online like a gaming clan, but not political, but nevertheless they don't just sit and absorb off the internet. And the last is the general social media users, which of course is basically everybody. And they wanted to know whether being in any of these camps made you more or less likely to have different forms of political engagement. And here's what they found out. Well, not a big surprise up front. The politically active online people, they found, were statistically significantly more likely to partake in big P and small p political activities offline, like, for example, try and persuade somebody to vote a certain way or make a donation to a campaign. They also found that the general, what I call creative, what I think they call participative online people who are not so political, also, those people had some positive correlations that were statistically significant, in particular to things like volunteering and civic activity, and to small p politics, so stuff like signing a petition that's about the university's policy on something or other. But they also found the following things. They found that the first group, the politically active online group, was not statistically significantly more likely to engage in civic acts, things like volunteering, even though they're more likely to go and like argue about it and write blog posts and give money. They were not so much more likely to go and volunteer and do things like that. It also turned out, this is very strangely, that they were no more likely to actually vote. So having argued a lot, they would then, I don't know, sit and write even more furious political blog posts or something. The general social media user group, the group that is neither very creative, doesn't write their own sort of blog, doesn't edit their own videos, doesn't do that sort of thing, doesn't organise online gaming clans, those people were absolutely no more likely than the rest of the population to engage in any form of civic, social, political participation at all. So, and the last thing was that the people who do also politically. So I've already done that. I've got ahead of me. I've told you those conclusions. So there are there's some interesting, very obvious, and not so intuitive stuff there. Of which probably the most promising, the one we should feel happy about, is those kinds of people who just sort of participate online, who have Flickr feeds full of arty photos. Those people may very well be slightly more likely to do things like volunteer and take part in local small p political campaigns. But a whole lot of the arguments that were very, very strongly before, or was very, very strongly for the effect of of using social media on especially youth engagement, and those people who argued against very, very strongly, both of those appeared to be not at all upheld. The general use of social media for a general kind of lifestyle doesn't really appear to either make you less or more likely to be very political. Let me look at the evidence in another field. The big argument field, the one that spilled into the pages of The New Yorker over the last year, has been the effect of social media on revolutions and Tahrir Square and so on. And there was a study called Blogs and Bullets that was partly authored by Ethan Zuckerman, who I think is really one of the smartest single people on this field. And he just raised a really obvious point, which is that in order to... Sorry, not he, the whole group. In order to really know whether a particular form of kind of media had a big macro-political impact is a massively, massively complicated question. There have always been revolutions prior to Twitter. There will be ones after. Twitter may very, very well have an effect, but the study is extremely hard, and the evidence base at the moment they suggested really doesn't support either the kind of Morozovs or possibly the Shirkis of this world. There's actually there's not really enough out there. So this is how we get into a war of dueling anecdotes. That's not to say that I believe that things like the social media and the internet more generally don't have any effect on political participation. It seems really obvious to me that wherever the internet lowers the barrier to doing nearly anything, it seems that more people will do more of it, whether it's buying car insurance or appearing naked on chat roulette in front of strangers. There's just something about lowering barriers enough that will get more people to do things. My society runs websites that let you make freedom of information requests and ask the council to fix your street and that sort of thing. And those see 50% of the people turning up are essentially people who've never done that before in their whole life. Why is that? Because you lower the barriers, people who had a need will come along and do things. So I do tend to think that on some of the big macro issues, I'm a general sort of supporter of the internet. But what was really interesting and useful about looking at the evidence base was really two things. One, you can get some real surprises in there. So the fact that the politically active online group, for example, don't do kind of more civic stuff, volunteering and so on than other people, is just really interesting, is worth knowing, is worth studying. Another thing that is worth looking at the academic papers for is to realize how much is missing and how much hasn't been answered and how much hasn't been seriously looked into yet. And so my concluding thought is this, which is those of us who are indeed paid to believe one thing in this field, but who have a little nagging voice that thinks maybe we should be watching to make sure it's not all a load of nonsense. What we need to do collectively is two things in relation to the academic world. One, we need to provide that world with the evidence that only we have. Someone like My Society or 38 Degrees, we just have a ton of information lurking on our servers that, given to the right academics, can tell those academics useful stories about whether or not things are or are not working. And the second is we need to make demands of the academics who work in this field. There was a conference that I won't name about 18 months ago where I went through the entire pile of papers submitted. It was all fundamentally an academic conference about the internet and society and campaigning. And there were like about 100 abstracts, and I just didn't think that a single one of them contributed anything to the meaningful debate. And what I mean by anything meaningful, I mean any actionable quantitative intelligence that could basically say, you know what, we really shouldn't do this, it doesn't seem to work, or maybe we should do this, it does seem to work. It is for those of us, for the My Societies and 38 Degrees of this world, to really kind of put the academics' feet against the fire and go, you know what, you've had 15 years and you still haven't done a single reasonable test of this kind, for example. And can you please get with that program? And so that's me being one of the creators of these things, raising some doubts, raising some endorsement, and mainly just saying evidence is always worth having. We've got some. The academics need it. Let's make sure they use it properly. Thank you.